Hello, everyone. Welcome to our reality capture education series. We are back with our panel of reality capture experts, and today we are going to be focusing on Cyclone 3DR. I'm Christine Grail with Leica Geosystems, part of Hexagon, and I will be your moderator for today's session. Our lead instructor today is Jonathan Efaw. Jonathan has more than 11 years of experience in the geospatial, terrestrial laser scanning, and mobile mapping industries. He's a reality capture support specialist. He is the technical lead for mobile mapping support, and most important for today, he is our leading Cyclone 3DR expert. He provides support and training for Cyclone 3DR workflows. So if any of you have been working extensively with Cyclone 3DR, I'm sure that you have been working somewhat with Jonathan. Jonathan will show us a few things in Cyclone 3DR today before we dive into your questions. Also on our panel, we have Andrea Fournier. Andrea has served as HDS Technical Support Lead in North America for 23 years, and she is also the Reality Capture Support Manager. We have Karen Hughes, a Reality Capture Training Manager. Karen has more than 23 years of experience in the field. For all the fantastic content you have access to through HGSU Smart Plan and the in-person education offered through HGS University, which is now LGS University, Karen is behind the scenes working to make that happen. And last but not least, of course, we have Michael Harvey, and 23 seems to be the magic number. Mike also has 23 years of experience in laser scanning. He is the Senior Product Manager for Leica Geosystems Reality Capture. Our session today is live, and we will be answering your questions as we go through the content today. We appreciate all of you who took the time ahead of time to drop your questions in. So we will have some of those available to answer, but certainly as we go through the presentation, feel free to pop your questions into the questions box, which you should see on the screen. If we don't have time to get to all the questions in our live session today, someone will reach out to you to answer your question later by email. Before we get started today, we do have a few quick polls just to see where everyone is in the audience. The first question we have, just to get a pulse on where everyone is with laser scanning, is how would you describe your experience with laser scanning? It looks like most of those in our audience actually are either experienced, somewhat experienced, or they consider themselves a power user. So we've got a lot of experience in the room here. That's great. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of very challenging questions for our panel of experts, and we look forward to those. I'm going to go ahead and close this out and share those results so that you can all see where we're at. Our next question is, do you use Leica laser scanning solutions? I'm sure that a lot of you on the line here today do use Leica, but maybe there are some who don't. And so we're just curious where you're at. Go ahead and answer that. It looks like we've got a pretty even split between exclusive Leica shops and those who use both Leica and other brands. And that's fine. That's good. I'm glad that you guys are on the line today. So let's go ahead and close that out and share the results. And then just a couple more here. Just wanted to find out how many in the audience were already using Cyclone 3DR so that we have an idea of how we address some of these questions, how in depth we need to go. So again, it looks like we've got a pretty even split here. That's great. So it looks, we're happy to see that some of you have dived right in with the software already. And those of you who haven't, I'm sure you'll learn a lot today. One last question before we get started, and that is, what are you most hoping to take away from today's session? You might just be here for some workflow tips and tricks if you're already using Cyclone 3DR. You might be here trying to figure out whether you want to invest more in like a reality capture or somewhere in there. It looks like we've got a pretty good mix in our audience today, so that's great. I'm going to go ahead and close this, share those results, and with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Jonathan. He can kick us off with some really great content on Cyclone 3DR.
Perfect. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So a couple of things that I wanted to go over today inside of Cyclone 3DR are just some common things that happen, or some questions that come up between Cyclone Core and Cyclone 3DR. Some of the common differences between the two. So the first thing that I want to go over, we've got some TRK 100 data here from our TRK 100 system. It's some good clean data that I've run through the classification algorithm inside of 3DR. You can see here I've got my curbs classified out. I've got my vehicles and everything else classified out as well. I'm just going to change this back to the real color view here, and then we'll get started. So the first thing I want to talk about is the trimming tool in 3DR. So you can go here to the clean tab, and on the clean separate icon, we can use these fencing tools, just like you're probably familiar with inside of Cyclone Core. So the first of which is the polyline tool. So this polyline fence is probably very familiar to what you would see inside of Cyclone Core, where we can just outline an object. We can hit the enter button here. It selects our object, and then we can delete or keep, or we can split. So the split tool is something that you would probably be familiar with as far as copy to new model space, right? So if we say split here, you can see we can turn off our old data, and then we can actually turn on our new data here that we've split out to isolate it and work with it by itself. So if I say OK here, I can actually click on this data by itself, and then I can toggle off everything and I can work with it alone. So I just wanted to go over that really quick as far as how, if you have a specific object that you might need to isolate or something that you might need to work on, let's say it's a piece of equipment or something like that that you need to do some specific modeling on in 3DR or draw specific line work, that's the way that you go about doing that. The next question that I get a lot is, how do I draw line work in 3DR? How do I make points in 3DR? And I'm going to go over that right now with this extract tab. So in the extract tab, you have the option. This is where also all of your options are to draw things like circles, rectangles, planes, cylinders, cones, spheres, to do all of your extraction. And there are fitters for these, whether you can fit to the entire point cloud or do maybe a region grow fit. In today's case, though, we just want to draw some curb and gutter here. So let's go to the polyline tool. This is how we would draw a polyline, just like you would inside of Core. And you'll notice down here at the bottom, whenever we enter an extraction tool, we get some other snapping tools that pop up. And some of these are going to look really familiar, right? Like the Smart Pick viewport inside of Core. So say, for example, we have the highest point snap here that we might use to draw some of this curb. And then you can see our snapping icon shows up in blue, and then we just work our way down the curve really quick. Then if we want to go to lowest point, I can hit enter and go to the next line, and then I can work my way down with the lowest point snap as well. So that's the way that we would draw some line work, and then I can clean that up later with, I didn't snap perfectly on that, but we can clean that up with the editing of the polyline tools later on. For points, you do the same thing. You go over here and click the points tool, and then we can use all of our individual snaps. There's a button down here. If your menu doesn't look quite like this, you can expand it to give you more information about what you're going to snap on. And we can go through and snap and put individual points on. All these objects, these points, these lines can be exported into, as say the DWG format, DGN. We can go, there's a send to AutoCAD function. So if you have Civil 3D or AutoCAD already installed and it's installed on the same PC that you do your 3DR work on, you can right click and say send to AutoCAD, and it will automatically import that over into the drawing that you have open. In addition to this just regular line work, if you need to add notations to your lines, like a field to finish, or if you were going to click on points and need to have note tags on each individual point, on the extraction tab here, we have this virtual surveyor tool as well. So the virtual surveyor tool, we can decide we're going to put point features or line features down, and then we can set up a code list. So here I kind of have just the generic code list that I had built, but you can import them as well. So if you set them up in the format for Cyclone 3DR, you can import them from an Excel file. And then you can also save these out. So you can build in the layer that you want your data to go onto, and then you can build in your feature code that you want to be assigned whenever you click on something. So if I were to say, okay, here, let's say top of curb, I can click on a point feature. This is a manhole feature. Let me see if I can find a manhole here. There's a manhole. Whenever I click, you can see now I have a point number assigned to it, and then I also have my code for a manhole cover. So those are those features for drawing lines. So all that works kind of the same way. You can go into the extract tab and just build whatever you want, just snapping on the point cloud as needed. If you need to go back and edit something, you can you can click on objects in the model space here, and then you can right click on them, and you can go into the edit option and move from there. The other thing you'll notice is that you can click on things in the main viewport, and you can also click on them over here. So like in that scenario where I was trying to click on this line, if you ever get into a situation like that where you can't quite click on something, you can always go over here and click on it to select it in the outliner. They exist in both spaces. Something else that I want to mention is it's a big request all the time for automatic extraction of some things. We do have some scripts that are built into 3DR when you install it. One of them is the curb extraction script. And I'll show you, I typically will use it to extract top of curb on something, and then maybe we'll clean from there. So the way that script works, if you find a section of curb like this we have here where we have some good coverage, then we'll go and extract a polyline. So let's go and give it a seed polyline with just a couple points here, something like this. Then we select that line, and on the scripts tab, we can just run our curb extraction script. And you'll see it pops up over here on the left, and it gives us our parameters that we can input. We can make some changes to these parameters to see how we might want to, if for unique situations like curbs, like this sampling step's going to look for this curb every 1 foot and then try to draw this line as it goes. Then we can feed it a curb width for back of curb and curb height for top of curb, and then the angle. So it's basically setting up the template of the curb that it's going to be looking for. And then we can say, okay, when we have those parameters, 1 point cloud should be displayed. Because I split this point cloud here, let me turn this off. It's looking for 1 single point cloud. So because I have 2 there, it didn't want to cooperate with us. Now we should be able to run our curb extraction script. And you can see it will start to work its way down through the curb. We'll go to a different spot. When it comes across a break like this, when it gets to a point where it can't continue, it'll throw that message to you and then stop. So in this case, I would just move on to the next section. We'll draw another little polyline here for a seed polyline. Grab that line again. And then I've already got my script window up here, so I can just hit the play button on this script that we've got and then go from there. And you can see as it goes, it's just working its way down the curve, drawing that line. And then don't worry about this green line because we're just going to get rid of this. It's just kind of a guideline that it's using to calculate at the bottom there. So it's doing its thing 1 foot at a time. It got to the end there that it got to. Like I said, what I usually do is I'll just grab that line and delete it. And then I have my top of curb line here. So you can see that it's a little bit sharper than I would like. It kind of bounds up and down. So there is a quick way that we can edit lines in 3DR that I would do with this. So I would grab this polyline, and then on the clean tab, I have all my polyline editing tools. So this is where you can add vertices to a line. You can modify, smooth a polyline, resample it to add vertices in. In this case, I'm going to use the smooth polyline tool. And you can see here I get this guideline. This pink line that's next to my red line here shows me what my future polyline is going to be based on the parameters that I have set here. I can increase this smoothing intensity. You can see that, and we're kind of on a straight line, so it's a little harder to see it here. But the higher that you set these numbers, the more intense the smoothing is going to be. So if this went around a corner, it would gradually draw that curve in, and rather than following the actual corner that we drew. So in this case, I might just leave this is maybe a 4. You can see now we have a nice smooth line across there off the top of the curb. And then if I wanted to create the offset for this, if I wanted to go down and make my bottom of curve, there's a quick way that I can do that as well. And that is on the coordinate system tab here. So on the coordinate system tab, we have a couple different, this is where all of our options for moving things are. So if you need to mirror something or offset it, scale something, translate or rotate, all those options are here in the transformation tab. So the first thing that I would look at in this scenario is we want to create a copy of this line down below, maybe just as kind of a guide, just a quick offset for this curve. So in that case, I would say translation, and then it asks us for the direction that we want to translate it. So in this case, this is just kind of a normal vector, or XYZ direction. If we click on this little blue arrow over here, it actually brings up things for us, and you can see our arrow up here giving us a guide as far as how we're going to be moving this individual line, what the direction's actually going to be. So I can even actually grab this line, and you can see if I grab this arrow, it's actually updating my vector over here in real time. So it gives us some nice quick snaps for the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis. And then also it gives us a nice reverse button here, which I really like. This reverse button is going to allow us to go straight down. So that's what I'm looking for in this particular case. And I want to move this down 6 inches. So another nice thing about 3DR is you can just type in the actual measurement and it will do the unit conversion for you. So I just type in the shorthand for inches here, and even though my project is in feet, it's going to do that conversion to 1/2 foot for me in the background. I don't actually have to type in 0.5 feet for this in this scenario. And then I check the box for create copies, and then I can say, I can set it to create as many copies as I want. So if I wanted to create 15 lines 6 inches apart straight down, I could change this number to 15. In this case, I just want one, because I just want one bottom of curve line here. So then I hit preview. And you can see, because there's an angle of the curve, we have a little bit of an offset here. So the way that we would fix that, we could go in the translate tool and we could fix that again. But in this particular case, rather than manually entering a specific measurement, what I would do in this case is I might use the free move tool. And the free move tool, you can see, will give us this these handles that we can adjust by a specific axis. We can adjust with these squares, which, like this one, would lock the z-axis and only move in the XY. Same goes for these others. And then it gives us rotation tools and scaling tools as well. So in this particular case, I would probably take this flat plane there and just move it over with that. And that would give us our answer. So that's kind of just a quick way to draw on some curb and gutter. You could go and use that tool as well as it can. Obviously, the denser the data you have, the better that tool is going to work. So I've seen it many times trace full curb lengths around based off of that tool itself. So the next thing that I want to talk about that I typically get questions on is, how do you create a mesh, right? How do you create a surface in 3DR? And 3DR really shines with the actual ground extraction and DTM creation tool. So the quickest way to extract the ground surface is on the surface modeling tab. You can just select your entire point cloud. I'm not going to do any cleaning to this point cloud at all to show you how this works. Then you can just go to the DTM option. And then what it's going to ask for is it's going to ask for a parameter over here. And this is the slope cutoff that it's not going to go past with your surface. So if you adjust this, the higher you set this setting, it's going to accept a higher slope tolerance for making your surface. So if you've got some steep ground, it gives us these nice little guides down here that help us to understand, what kind of terrain I'm dealing with. In our case here, this is relatively flat, right? This data's out in Arizona, so we've got no elevation gain. So having this as a 10 degree cutoff is going to be fine. That will generate our DTM surface for us. Now you might say, well, the curves themselves are, closer to 90 degrees, those angles, and that's true. And so this DTM tool, you have to bear in mind, will probably miss curves just because of the way that it's operating. It's going to get you a quick ground surface. But what I'm going to do after we do this is I'm going to show you a quick way that we can go back using this surface and use our curb lines or use a close cutoff ground surface to generate a DTM or a surface file that has these curb lines in it when we have a scenario like this. So I'm just going to go ahead and say OK here, just double check my settings. Another thing you'll notice when we run this tool is it actually will filter our ground points out for us without classifying them. So if you have a data set that is not classified already, this DTM tool can be very helpful to get your ground points out as a separate layer if you need to submit ground points or extract them. And let's say you need to do it really quickly and don't have time to run classification on the whole data set, this can be a very quick way to get that done and get your ground points out. So we'll just wait a second for this to finish. There we go. Okay. So now we have our ground points. You can see it cleaned out everything for us. So if you just need to clean out some data, or clean out without going through and fencing and you know, kind of mowing the grass, as we always call it, where you cut from the side and do things like that, you can see this does a really good job of filtering out that data. So I'll just hide the mesh here and see, this is the ground cloud that it extracted. So these are ground points. If, say, for example, you needed to just export these out, we have this separate point cloud as needed. The original data is still there too, it's just turned off. So it just turns that off for you after it separates out this copy of the ground cloud. So like I mentioned before though, in this scenario, our mesh, I'll turn our ground mesh back on. Our mesh is a good ground surface, but it doesn't exactly have our curb lines and things that we would want to have in here. So there's a couple different ways we could do this. The first way that I want to show is using the sharp edges tool. So with the sharp edges tool, if you have break lines like this, something that you can do is select your mesh and select like maybe these curb lines that we already drew in. Let me go underneath it there and grab it. And then on the extract tab, or sorry, on the surface modeling tab, there's a sharp edges tool here that's right next to borders and above reduce. What this tool will do is it will use these break lines that you put in to modify your surface. So I'll just show you how it works. We click the sharp edges tool, and then this cleaning distance sets the distance away from the line that will modify your mesh. So in this case, I was showing something yesterday where I had this at 3 feet. In our case, we probably don't want it to be quite 3 feet. We probably want it to be half a foot, somewhere around an inch. And then we can preview it. And you can see what that did for us. So on an inch from either side of this line, you can see that it modified my surface. This might be a little bit easier to see if I change the representation here. It modified my surface to match my break lines. So if you already have, say, for example, maybe you've already got survey points along your curb, then you could use those lines that you've incorporated from your survey with a quick DTM that you generate in 3DR, and then make a quick mesh like this using that sharp edges tool with the break lines that you already have existing to get your DTM finished. So that's one way to go about doing it. Let me change this back to smooth so we can see here. The other way is a kind of a trick that I picked up doing this for a little while on DTMs, where we can make a quick surface like we did with the DTM tool, and then we can use this surface to go back and cut our existing point cloud. Rather than filter out with that slope on the DTM tool like we had before, we're going to filter based off the distance from this ground surface we made. So what we can do is select our point cloud, select our mesh that we made from our ground mesh, and then on the clean tab, right by our tool where we cut the point cloud, we have this tool next to it that lets us do separate according to distance. So that's what we're going to click separate according to distance. And what this does is allows us to use an object to cut with, or as a cutting plane. So you can see here, it says our filter object is our ground mesh, which we can change. We could change that to, you know, it doesn't have to be a mesh either. It could be a plane. It could be any number of objects that you create in 3DR. And then it's going to ask us for a threshold. So in this case, I have it set to 4 inches. I'd say my curve here probably is going to be, you know, somewhere around 6. So to play it safe, I'll say 8 inches on either side. So it's gonna filter this point cloud 8 inches on either side of this mesh that we made in the beginning. So I'll hit the preview button on this, and we'll see what that looks like. It should divide this point cloud into 2 separate colors. And then what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to keep the points that are close to the mesh, which will, it'll filter the data, but it will preserve our curves rather than filter them out based on slope. So you can see here, everything green and everything tan, we turn off everything tan. This is the point cloud that we're going to get, everything that's within that distance. So I'll say okay on that. We'll turn off our old mesh. And now what I would do is I would select our point cloud and then go back to my surface modeling tab. Instead of a DTM, I would use my 3D mesh tool. And the 3D mesh tool with meshing in 2 steps will provide us more of a, it's not going to be more of a DTM drape. With meshing in 2 steps, we'll get a preview first, just to give us a guide as to what our mesh is going to look like. We say okay on that. And the second step is the refining step, where it goes back and uses the point cloud to refine the mesh. And I'll say okay on this, and we'll let this run. So what this is going to provide us with is going to provide us with a more detailed mesh based off of the entire ground point cloud, or close to the ground point cloud, that doesn't cut things out based on their slope. So when this finishes up, we'll have a much, I guess I would say, a higher resolution mesh in this scenario that's ready for maybe creating contours or exporting directly to a land XML to bring in as a surface. There we go. Shouldn't take us too long here. So while this is running, something else that we can talk about is the replace a part tool, which is something that I'm going to show us once the mesh refinement's finished here. So what you can see up here, kind of where, if you can see where my cursor is at, underneath the tank tab, there's a tool called replace a part. And what this tool does is it actually cuts a hole in the mesh and then patches that hole based on the surrounding mesh area. So let me turn this over here. And so now you can see that we have a lot more or higher detailed mesh than we did before. If I had turned up the refining step, we could get even more level of detail based off of like I had before with the sharp edges tool. If I had turned up the or turned down the distance on the refining tool, we would have some really sharp edges going through here. It just takes a little bit longer for it to run. So once you have this data, there might be some spots that you need to fix. Like say, for example, here, we might have a spike. With that replace a part tool that I had mentioned previously, let me reverse this. We can just select this surface, then say replace a part, and then we can just circle an object, and you can see that it cuts a hole and then fills a hole based off of the proximity around it. So the same thing happens as curvature filling. You can adjust the curve that it fills in the mesh as well. So we can take that and say for a tunnel, for example, the hole that gets filled will actually be, it will carry the curve of the tunnel. So that's a tool that works really well in that scenario. One more thing that I want to show us before we kind of turn it over to questions, a question that gets asked a little bit is how do I cut cross sections, or how do I create plan view sections inside the 3DR? The way that you would do that is you can set up kind of a roadway alignment tool where we draw a polyline as our center line. So in this case, I might select this polyline. I'm just going to draw one in for us really quick, just rough for a center line. And then we'll use that smoothing tool that I mentioned earlier to sort of smooth this out. So we go to the clean tab, smooth polyline. You can see this is going to smooth. Here's a good example. If I adjust the smoothing higher, how you can see it's going to, the higher I adjust the smoothing, the harsher it's going to change it. The other thing that you can do is add more vertices. So in this case, since I have a longer line, I probably need to add some more vertices in here. And then if I have a mesh, I can say project on mesh here and pick my mesh, and that'll actually clamp that line to the surface. Because right now, if I smooth this line, it's not going to be, it's going to kind of pull it off the surface a little bit. So let's do something like this. There we go. We can say okay, and now we have a new line as our center line. So what we could use in this scenario is we could grab our center line, we can grab our mesh, and then on the analysis tab, we have this profile extraction tool. It works very similar to this section extraction tool over here. The only difference is the profile extraction tool will provide us with actual sort of plan views that we can take straight as a sheet. So I can say profile extraction. You can see it's going to ask us for the direction of our line. It's going to ask us how we want our distances to be calculated, and then what prefix we want for our individual cross sections. In this case, I want them to be vertical. I don't want these to be locally perpendicular to the line. So I'll just go ahead and say next. Then this is asking us for how often we want them. So we can have, in this case, it's going to be every 25 feet. I make this 50 feet. We can have them run all over, and we can also choose a custom range. So we could pick, say, we could pick from here to here, and then it would only generate cross sections in that area. In this case, I'm going to just run them all over though. If we needed them to pass through a specific spot, we could also check the box for pass through here. So I'll say insert. You can see I've got all of my cross section stations put in as you'd want them. Then I can say next. And here's where we set our cross section width. So in this case, I've got 20 feet here, so 20 feet on either side would make this a 40-foot total width cross section. And then this is asking for the layout of how they're going to be displayed, those sheet views, and how they're going to be laid out in their grid format. So once I'm happy with this, I'm going to run these at 20 feet and say compute. And then you can see here we've got our cross sections are actually built in here. So on our next phase here, if we're happy with the way that our cross sections look, we can say next. And you can see it generates our sheet views here for us. We can change our grid format for our sheet. So we could change this down to something like 1 foot, or I've got it in metric, so that'll change our grid spacing before we send it out to AutoCAD. And then we even have an option here right at the end of the tool where we could export straight to DXF, or we can use that send to option that I talked about earlier, which will send it directly into our AutoCAD drawing that we have. So once we're finished with that, we can just exit this wizard, and then we've got our cross sections created. So those are just a few things that I wanted to go over. I wanted to talk about a few questions that we get asked sometimes in how you do certain workflows inside of Cyclone 3DR, and how are they different than how you would do them in Cyclone Core, and then also what are some improvements and nice features that we have available to us in Cyclone 3DR that we can do these with. So with that, I'll just turn this data back on here.
Thank you so much for that, John. That was excellent. I think that gave those in our audience a lot to start working with and thinking about, and hopefully that will help with some of the questions that some people had. I really appreciate all the questions that have come in. I'm going to have my panelists go ahead and turn on their webcams and turn their mics back on. Before we dive into the audience questions, I did want to back up just a little bit. I think most of the folks who are in our audience today are familiar with Cyclone Core. They're familiar with Cyclone 3DR, or at least the concept. They understand the Leica reality capture workflow. But for anyone who's not, I would like to ask maybe Mike Harvey to give us just a real quick overview of where does Cyclone 3DR fit into the overall Leica reality capture workflow, and why are we talking about this Core versus 3DR?
Sure. So I mean, for all the Core lovers, Core has been out since the very first version came out actually back in 2000. So it is very old, and the challenge with that is that the underlying code of Cyclone Core has gotten to a point where we can no longer update it, primarily because the way it was coded, that the genius that for those that have been around for a long time, a gentleman named Jonathan Kung knew how to code in a very bizarre or interesting way where you knew how computers would interact with the kernel. So that's kind of like the level between the BIOS and your operating system. So the challenge is that that's a very distinct group of skills, but also as with your new operating systems, that they're more app-based instead of program-based. So therefore, they sit in a different level. So in order for us to do anything with Core, we would be faced with a full rewrite anyway. And then we have this great tool with 3DR that has a lot of fantastic tools in there, and then the architecture of it allows us to be much more nimble with creating tools as we're moving forward. So that we've kind of made a decision that Core just kind of needs to go away. Because the other thing is, I know a lot of people say, "Wow, I've looked at 3DR and it looks like it might be a little tough to learn." And my answer to that is, if you could figure out how to use Core, you can figure out how to use 3DR, because Core was dang near impossible to figure out the way it was laid out. The joke between me and my boss, Chuck Corney, were like, "Yeah, the '80s called one of their UX back." So. So that's kind of the thing there, but 3DR is in full swing. I mean, we have a massive team that is developing 3DR. There is some major projects in currently to create feature parity and beyond. It is going to be a very important part of the reality capture portfolio moving forward. Not only is it going to be accepting just static scanning, it's also, as John was showing with TRK data, but it's also with other, and anything that really makes a point cloud, really. So if any customers out there that is using, let's say, Hexagon MI equipment, that software will be exporting OBJ form files, and then you would bring those into 3DR to match to your reality capture data. So now we can start to stretch the boundaries across more divisions within Hexagon, and that's really the power of Hexagon there. So yeah, there's a lot of things going on with 3DR that is exciting. Now, furthermore, that 3DR is also helping us develop a lot of the in-field applications. So I've seen a lot of questions on here that say, I would like to have some field applications for inspections and those types of things. Well, good news, those are coming. And it is the 3DR team that is helping us write those in some of those things that may end up in programs like Field 360. So you can actually start doing some of your matching there. So it is a very important part of the overall workflow. And then lastly, of all the market research we've done over the years, and of course, me being with this company for the last 20 plus years, there seems to be a very split, or a very unique split of customer types. There are those that like to go to their dedicated software like 3DR, and then often will create their reports, and that's good. And then there's also that group of people that like to go into the CAD system. And like, I had a question here, it's like, well, I go to 3DR, why can't I go to CAD? Well, you can. So that's completely up to you. Now, the good news is a lot of development that we're looking into is possibly like some of the tools that are in CloudWorks. Well, guess what? They were developed by the 3DR team. And we've actually ported those into that environment. So there's certainly a lot of interesting things there. And as well as that, the 3DR team is leading our charge with a lot of the AI things that we're doing in the market right now that will move things much quicker, because data sets certainly aren't getting any smaller, and we're capturing more and more per day. So we need to be smarter in how we process our data.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Thank you so much for that explanation. Let's go ahead and get to some of these audience questions, because there are just some fantastic questions. Again, we had some questions that were submitted ahead of today's live session, and we have a number of questions here. I'm just going to dive into this list from our live session, and then I know Mike's going to have some from those that submitted. But we have a question here about large data sets, since we were just talking about that. If you had a large data set and needed to split it into multiple point cloud files to fit a certain size, is there a way to do that in 3DR? It would especially be helpful if we could do this along a trajectory, and they don't want to degrade the point cloud resolution. So Jonathan, I don't know if you want to take that one.
Sure. So within 3DR, if you don't degrade, the first option that I would recommend would be to do the reduction tool. But as you mentioned, you don't want to degrade the resolution of the point cloud. So what you're looking for is something that would create maybe like tiles along the trajectory. I understand what you're looking for. The way that I would say to do that, as of right now, there's currently not, say, where you would say, along this line, cut every so many feet. But that is essentially the way you would use the split tool to do that. So you would use that clean separate tool, cut it into sections based off of a guideline. And then you could even set that up with a script to run based off of each individual. You could tell it to cut that clean separate tool every so often to cut it into whatever size you might need. File size is going to vary based on the density of the point cloud in those areas, though. So keep that in mind as you do it.
Okay, our next question is, using the virtual surveyor, is there an option to pick a point and then give it a code like in Core? Or do you only have the option to pick a code that is already stored?
So the option to create a code is there on that same panel. So you can open that up and add a code in if you need one, but it does not pop up and prompt you for a code that you can input while you're picking points. So you need to build that code list beforehand, or let's say that you get to a point that you're going to have to add a code for, and you say, oh, I need to add one here. You can go over into that panel, open that menu, and add it into your existing code list, and then go from there.
Okay, and then a follow-up question is, do we still have the ability to create alignments and sections like in Core?
When you say like an actual a roadway alignment that would go into.
Yeah, John, I think they're talking about kind of like the old alignment tool that was in Core. So not yet. That tool is actually under development right now. But John showed a great example of creating an alignment with the mesh and creating a cross section there. But in Core, I know that you can import a land XML file, which would be your baseline, or some sort of a center line from a CAD file, and those types of tools are currently under development right now. I also know that a lot with Virtual Surveyor, it's also being worked on, so a lot more is going to be added into that as well. So a lot of fun things are coming.
All right, this one is about a mesh. What would be the purpose of creating a mesh in 3DR if it's too large to bring into CAD or other drafting software? This is the main reason several survey companies are struggling with Core, or with moving from Core.
So one of the reasons that you might want to create a mesh would be it will directly translate as a surface. So these mesh files that we build inside of Cyclone 3DR, they can export directly as a land XML. So you can bring that straight into Civil 3D and it will import as a functional Civil 3D surface without you needing to go in and use your line work or your break lines to build that surface. It's already built for you. The other reason is the mesh, since it's a triangulation model, you have the ability to smooth areas that you might need to smooth and make edits to it directly on that surface as you go. The other option that you have, so let's say that your mesh is too big for the software that you want to bring it into. There are reduction tools inside of 3DR that actually intelligently look at the surface of the mesh and then will reduce the number of triangles that compile that mesh without, you have a slider that you can control the intensity at which it changes the actual formation of the mesh to allow you to optimize it to make it into other softwares. Thirdly, if you have a mesh that's still, for whatever reason, if you can't reduce it to get into whatever software you need it to, a mesh can be converted back into a point cloud using a sample grid. So you could convert it back to an XYZ text file and then bring it back in that way. So there's several different options.
Okay, we're going to answer one more question here from our live audience, and then we'll move into some that were submitted ahead of time just to make sure that we can address some of those as well. This question is a broader question. What types of projects or deliverables do most users use 3DR for? Is there a specific use case that makes 3DR just, yes, that's a no-brainer?
So there's a couple that I say that 3DR has a ton of uses. There's a ton of tools in there. There's all kinds. I find different uses for it all the time. But I would say two of the kind of the most shining, the core pillars of the use cases for it are, well, one of the ones that we just looked at, where we're doing extraction work, we're doing topo creation, mesh editing and smoothing for topography purposes. And the other one is the analysis tools inside of 3DR. So the suite of analysis tools allow us to compare a point cloud to another point cloud, right? So we can do change detection, we can do clash detection, we can do progress monitoring, we can do all these things where we have a scan that we want to compare to something else, and it doesn't have to be another scan. It can be a model, it can be a BIM object, it can be another scan, it could even just be points. We can load a text file in and compare deformation, we can check camber. There's so many things that we can do with it from the analysis suite of tools that I would say those are kind of the two core pillars of use cases for 3DR. Everything else, like I said, there's a ton of other uses. There's always things that are popping up that people are telling me they're using it for. So, but those are the kind of the two main ones that I would say.
Yeah, we always need those people to just let's try it. Let's see if it'll work for this, you know. And then again, a follow-on question to that one is, what is the advantage of using 3DR and not just the point cloud straight out of Cyclone Register 360 into Civil 3D?
Well, I would say again, the suite of analysis tools that are within 3DR and deliverable generation tools that we have in there. You know, when you're going from the scanner to your registration software and then going to 3DR, whereas 3DR is kind of a deliverable creation. Some people like to work with 3DR in tandem. Like if you're going to work in Civil 3D, based on the question, with that send to CAD tool, a lot of times since people would like to do drawing in 3DR, and then they will use that send to CAD tool to create their line work in a 3D environment and then send it over into CAD. And then with the analysis tools, like I said, that's where you would be, like, let's say you had a design model that you need to check, cut, and fill based off of your scan data. You can do that lightning fast in 3DR and then provide a heat map of that data, and then even maybe make a backdrop that you can load into Civil 3D. So they work hand in hand, and 3DR provides a lot of point cloud specific analysis tools.
Okay, well, let's go to support. What kind of support do we have for reading and writing in E57 format?
So for 3DR, you can import E57 files. We recommend importing LGSX because it handles the point cloud much better. I mean, both ways work, but you can import E57 if needed and export E57.
Okay, great, thank you. I want to share this response from someone in the audience when we were talking about applications for 3DR. Wayland said that he regularly creates mesh files in 3DR for 1,500 acre plus sites, and has no trouble using them in Civil 3D. So thank you for that feedback. That's good to know. Okay, is there a good workflow for point cloud to mesh to solid from 3DR into AutoCAD, specifically thinking about architectural as-built modeling?
That might be a Jonathan question.
So to go for architectural as-built modeling, this is an area where I would suggest it depends on the type of solid that you need. So if you're going from point cloud to mesh, that's one thing. You can get into a mesh file, but that mesh is going to come over as as I would say, a 3D CAD solid. So if you convert that mesh to a 3D CAD solid, one thing to remember is, yes, you will have a solid, right? You could make a column, you can make walls, you can have all these things, but they're geometric only. They're not going to carry any of the 4D information that you would have in, say, like a BIM model. Where to do something like that, you would want to be using a software maybe like CloudWorks for Revit, where that would you're doing your modeling in Revit with the filters based on the CloudWorks filters or fitters that will help you put things in like walls, pipes, and things like that that are native to that environment that have that 4D information. If you don't need that 4D information, then absolutely, yeah, just take your mesh file from 3DR, point cloud, mesh, solid, and then over.
All right, I finally got the list. My computer decided to cooperate.
Yes.
Okay, so we have one question that was coming in from Anonymous. With Cyclone Core no longer being updated, it's just a matter of time when this software will become obsolete by simply not keeping up to date the newest technology advancements. Let's see, in the world of geospatial data and processing, regardless, Cyclone Core is most likely will remain literally a core application for point cloud data processing, managed surveying, engineering across Australia for years to come. So my questions are, how do you envision this departure from trusted Cyclone Core application? What features of Cyclone Core will be available in 3DR, and which ones will be transitions to Register 360? In the current state of Register 360 is not capable of handling lots of registration the way Core does. It lacks functionalities and refinement in registration or algorithms. Will this be updated anytime soon? And we have been told that the newest update for Registry 360 will be released by the end of 2024, and it's not out yet. So, okay, there's a lot of good questions there. So how do I envision the departure of trusted Cyclone Core application? Yes, I have to agree with you that Cyclone Core has been known as the gold standard for a lot of years to come. Now, the thing is that there is, I mean, when Core was originally made, there was also only one scanner that we were supporting. So now that with many, many different types of sensors, like I said a little bit earlier, that we are now, we support all of, the scan station, all the PXX. We always also go back all the way to C10. With then all the BLK scanners, we can support the TRK scanners with Registry 360. So there's a lot of things, and the basket has certainly changed rapidly over the years. So it's just kind of the next evolution. What features of Core will be in 3DR? Well, the idea is to get all of the main tools over there. So, feature parity, like I said before, feature parity and beyond. So a lot of different things that are being worked on. Obviously, that last year we saw the addition of piping. So that tool is also being revised so that elbows and T's and all those things like you do have in Core are going to be coming. Steel is also on the list of us creating steel. So obviously we can also create steel in a lot of the CloudWorks packages. So that is also coming. Virtual Surveyor is now available in 3DR. Yes, it works a little bit different than it does in Core, but there is going to be some major enhancements done to it. So I am working very closely with that team to enhance it. What I'm shooting for is that it's going to think a little bit more like for any of the users that use Leica Captivate out in the field. So typically it's going to try to interact with the user a little bit more along the lines of that. Basically you take a shot first and then give it a code type of thing. So just order of operation will be a little bit different. Another question is, in the current state, Registry 360 is not capable of handling lots of registrations the way Core does. That one I need a little bit of help with, because I know that Registry 360 can take a lot of scans and registers those together. And this is also coupled with the next question of when the next version is coming. So the next version is going to be also allow what we've always called in Core's nested registrations. So therefore you can actually take one bundle that's solid and you have another one, you can actually connect those two together using those solid registrations. Now the reason why I was delayed is that it's not just a Registry 360 release, it is a release of a firmware, Failed 360, Register 360, and most of the major software. So they're all of them have to be talking nicely together because there are some major enhancements that are happening across the board. And that also includes the way geotags are handled in the LGSX format. And unfortunately, right at the end of the year, we found a massive bug that was going to blow up their file. So we had to make a tough decision and delay it a little bit, but it is very much so on the docket to be done. So I'm sure that the audience would much rather have a software that functions instead of having lots of problems. And I'm sure Andrea would also be much happier with that too, so she doesn't have to talk to you, even though she loves all of our customers. Let's see, what else do we have here? How much time?
We have a bunch of really easy questions from, I mean, not easy, but just kind of simple, yes or no.
Okay.
Somebody wants to know, is it possible to introduce a vertical exaggeration to the X section scale when creating X sections, right? Is that possible?
In 3DR?
Not yet.
Okay,
No.
and then we have, does it export the line work as per text dot lines, or do we have to change the line styles to text dot codes?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure because I don't know what the text dot line styles are, so I'm really not 100% sure how to do that. So whoever answered that question, that they could send us what the text dot requirements are, and then we can certainly figure that out for sure. Yeah.
Okay, great. Sure. Here's one about the cut plane tools. I use the cut plane tools for Virtual Surveyor. Are they still available in 3DR?
So cut plane, I mean, John kind of showed cut plane, right? Of basically, because the cut plane, the way the cut plane tool worked in Core is behind the scenes, you would take a sliver of points and you would actually make a mesh and then it would slice it. And then you would have all those different vertices that you can, either decimate or those types of things. So the tool that John showed of taking those sections along the line, pretty much the same tool. Now with it, I think there is a tool, an actual alignment tool that is going to be physically stepped through a workflow for alignments. That tool is being worked on right now. I've actually seen an alpha version of it, and it's looking pretty good. So it's going to look and feel a little bit more than what the core user is looking for as far as steps through the tool itself. But we have the other tools that are there now.
All right, I'm seeing several questions about the IMP files. And this one is, how do we transfer our old core projects, the IMP files, to 3DR?
Yeah, go ahead, Andrea.
So the IMP file, we do not have a converter for them. So what we would recommend right now is to export the model space view, maybe E57 and LGSX. Or LGS actually, because Cyclone Core does not export LGSX, but you can use the file converter, the LGS file converter, to convert that LGS file to an LGSX and open it in 3DR. So 3DR supports the E57 file or LGSX. So that's the only way to go. So if you have a Cyclone Core license right now, I would highly recommend converting all of your projects if you can.
Okay, thank you. In Core, you can model H-beams and put those on coordinates for plant applications. How do you put a point cloud on coordinates of a plant without survey control in 3DR? Someone
Karen,
from
you
our
want to take
panel?
that one, or John, you want to take that one?
Sure. So there's a function inside of Core or inside of Cyclone 3DR on the coordinate system tab, and there's two different types of registration tools. You have endpoints registration, and then you also have a best fit registration. So those are essentially just the way that 3DR, the nomenclature for target registration and a cloud-to-cloud registration, if you think of them that way. So with the endpoints registration, essentially what you do, if you have, so you have your plant coordinates, you have known coordinates or things that you can pick out in the scan that are on those known coordinates. You pick those out, you pick the correspondence, you pick your points. Like if you have the points as a text file, you can just import them into 3DR as a text file. Pick the point on your text file, then pick the point in your point cloud. And then you go back and forth one to the other, and then it'll give you the translation. You can preview it. It'll tell you how it moved, and it'll tell you the residuals as to your whole control network. So it works really well for that. And then, like I said, it has a best fit too. You can even apply. So let's say you have a plant model that you're trying to move your cloud to. You can move it with points and then even apply a best fit to the model to get it tighter. So it's also a nice feature.
Okay, great. We are getting close to the top of the hour here, so I think we have time for just one or two more questions. Mike, I know we have a bunch of questions that we've not been able to get to in this session. Do you see one or two hot button issues that we really should try to address live here? And then again, for those of you who've asked questions, we will make sure that we reach out to you after this session.
Well, let's see. There was one here that's one of a demo of removing noise, but that one we'll have to give you a movie or something like that.
But we can quickly just say, I think removing noise, the classification tool is a really good one that we can provide a movie for, because if you use auto classification, you can classify all of those points in 3DR on their own layers, and then you can segment them out where each layer you can turn on or off in the object tree.
There was one question that was submitted early before the session. It was, in Cyclone Core, I can move the vertices of a polyline without changing its elevation. How do I do the same procedure in 3DR? So I think that when John showed of moving that polyline along using those planes, that is the tool that how you're going to do that. So it's going to go along the axes that you have there that is created. So that is exactly how that is done there. So that's a good question there.
Okay, great. We do want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we are going to go ahead and bring this session to a close today. All of your questions are very valuable. That helps us know what we need to develop in terms of content, in terms of future sessions, so that we can make sure that everyone does get their questions answered, and so that you are ultimately productive and you are able to use your reality capture tools to accomplish whatever it is that you're trying to do. And all those applications just keep growing. So it's always great to hear about all of those. As you exit the webinar today, please do take a moment to fill out the survey that should pop up on your screen. That feedback is also very helpful to us as we plan for future sessions. We appreciate your time and we hope that this has been a valuable experience for you. Thank you so much. Thank you to those of you on the panel. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.